And we'll start in just 1 minute, everybody. Those of you who are watching on Facebook, those of you who are watching the replay on YouTube, feel free to comment once you've seen the video, and certainly, hashtag replay, or because you're not seeing it live. But if you're watching from Facebook, we'll start in just a few moments. We're going to allow people
you're not live streaming yet, I don't think.
It said I was, but let me see.
Let's see. It's not coming up for me.
Oh, preparing to live stream the webinar is still having to see the little blue line. Yep. Everybody, you see the little blue line? No, you don't, because I see the little blue line.
So all those comments to Facebook people, you're not hearing anything yet.
Well, but you will, because we're recording, and I can always put in there. Oh, cool, Alexis. So in Minnesota. Okay, good. Now it's being live streamed. Here we're good. So Minnesota, great. And Alexis, I know, said something about being a grad student. I'm looking forward. And Jasmine, you're here. Good to have you here. Jasmine, feel free to put in the chat where you're from. We're about to start. We just want to let everybody come in. And feel like there's one more person. Niakel, I hope I said it right. Arizona, all right. Jasmine's from Arizona. Is it Niakel or Niakel? I don't know if you'll be able to give me the phonetic and the, oh, it was right, Niakel? Oh, good, woohoo! And Niakel, let us know where you're from. Super excited to be introducing you all to our guest tonight. And, oh, I forgot to change my name to include my partner. That would be a very inclusive thing to do. And fantastic. So people will generally kind of come into the webinar at their own pace. We're very casual here and delighted to welcome everyone. I will start with saying, if everyone can just take a moment, I really want to acknowledge, a lot of times we hear people saying on what indigenous land they are. And one of the things that Jody and I have learned through this webinar and meeting all of the fabulous people is to really introduce this webinar to say that all land is indigenous land. And it's a real challenging experience to say this, because there's a lot of conversation out there that just saying what land we're on or that all land is indigenous land isn't doing anything to change the massacre, the onslaught, the takeover, however you want to phrase it. And so while I want to say all land is indigenous land, my hope is that that'll trickle out and we'll start to have more of a movement to support indigenous people and really pay more attention to our words not just being words, but our words turning into action. And that's a really important piece of what Jody and I decided to do with this webinar. So I'll let Jody introduce. Oh, I first also need to mention, because I do forget my role here. Also, we all races, gender, culture, abilities, sexual orientations, you are valued, heard, accepted, and welcomed here. We really want to create a space that is safe, that allows our panelists and our attendees to really be able to be who they are, and however, this is a room for our panelists, for our guests. So tonight, that's Oscar. And so whatever he shares is from his experience, and we just really want to put it out there to our attendees that you can't argue with somebody else's feelings. You can't really argue with somebody else's experience. Like, that's his experience, his feelings. And so we'll be delighted to invite you after we're done streaming live to turn off the recording, to join us in a casual conversation about your experiences or any takeaways that you have from this webinar. However, as you listen to our guest, we really want to impose, we want to impose a non-judgmental, loving, compassionate space. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Jody to read to you our purpose of having created the webinar.
Good evening, everyone. And Misha actually came up with the idea for the webinar and asked me to join her. And the webinar was created to engage in honest and authentic conversations about the longtime injustice of racism in America. During the webinar, we discussed systemic racism in an effort to dismantle white supremacy from the inside out. Our intention with the webinar is to participate in sustainable action and highlight the voices of Black, Indigenous, and people of color community members, giving them a safe space to be heard about their own experiences, their challenges, and their hopes without the need to educate white people.
There you have it. That is the purpose that we set forth. So do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Jody Lewis, and as I said, Misha came up with the idea for the webinar and graciously asked me to join her and co-host it and co-facilitate it. Just briefly about me, I am an attorney. I work for a nonprofit organization representing survivors of domestic and sexual violence, and I'm excited to be here this evening with Oscar.
Yeah. Thank you. And my name's Misha Safran, and I've been an educator for 30 plus years, teaching French and Spanish, all levels from little ones to seasoned ones. And I also raised 5 children, and I am now an academic life coach as well as a joy and resilience coach, trying to help our world one person at a time or a group of 12 at a time. But again, this is really... I've apologized a few times on this webinar for not having been more proactive sooner, and this is something that is sustainable that Jody and I can both do together to help change what's going on in the world. I'm also a singer-songwriter, so I write a lot of songs about, things just not being okay, and hoping that people will be willing to move forward and support us. So I'm going to share my screen and introduce our beautiful guest and human, Oscar Hernandez. And of course, my little button here is not, hold on. Okay, there we go. I can share my screen. So everyone, I'm going to be introducing you to Oscar Hernandez. And Oscar is an undocumented immigrant from Puebla, Mexico, an entrepreneur and DACA recipient with over 10 years of community organizing experience. At 19, he started a small landscaping business. Though it was a successful business, he felt he wasn't serving his community and started volunteering across Houston at every immigrant rights organization that would host him. And actually, before I read further, when I read the bio at the very, last week when I received it, I was so moved because I was so fortunate to be able to sing a song that I wrote for immigrants at a rally in Concord, California. And it was like so many people. It was like, scary. But it was so wonderful to have people there, to support immigrant rights. In 2013, Oscar was hired as the lead field organizer for United We Dream Houston, with the purpose to empower undocumented immigrants by using free legal services for DACA as a catapult for leadership development to become civically engaged. Do you want to just tell what the acronym DACA means for the group?
Yeah, DACA is Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals.
Thank you. Currently, Oscar is the community organizer for Houston in Action, an initiative made up of people and organizations who have come together to advance our community and build our community being the immigrant community. Is that right? The undocumented immigrants, Oscar? Or our community as in all of us? All of us. Okay, thank you. We are. It is our. Okay. And build a stronger Houston through a culture of civic engagement. And that's how we met Oscar, was through the Houston in Action. We were both a guest on a webinar together. So his goal is to build new organizers in Houston through the Community in Action Academy, give regular training on organizing, outreach, and leadership development. Oscar cares deeply about his community and family. He believes that through community action, we can build a better quality of life together. And it's such a pleasure to have you here, Oscar. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for the invite. Happy to be here. Happy Sunday.
Yeah, it's Sunday. Thank you. And just for everyone to know that we personally reached out to Oscar sometimes our guests just come to us through our not advertising, but our information that's out there. But I personally extend an invitation to Oscar because November is Native American Heritage Month, and I think every month, every day should be, honoring Indigenous people. But I wanted to make sure that we use this month to support the indigenous people and message. And so Oscar was kind enough to say yes and to come and share. We've already informed Oscar that he doesn't have to share anything he doesn't want to. He gets to be himself, and he also gets to contain or retain whatever information it belongs to him only, and we respect that. So guests are welcome to put questions in the chat as we move through, or the Q&A. If you're on Facebook, then you can certainly put questions in the Facebook. Jody will be monitoring that. And again, we can ask them of Oscar, and he can say, yes, I want to answer it, or no, I don't, or maybe I'll think about it and email you in 5 years. No, I'm just kidding. But Oscar, one of the things that we talked about before we let everybody into the webinar was this notion of, I even kind of think I hear the term indigenous and then undocumented immigrant. And for the people in Mexico, this land, all of this land, the Americas, how do we really call people immigrants? This is like your land. This is the indigenous people's land. So that's one thought I had. You can kind of roll on that if you want to. But the other thing is, being that this is a candid conversation about systemic racism, if you have anything you'd like to share or be willing to share around your personal experiences with racism, how the system maybe has failed you as a result of white dominance and privilege, we're open to hearing that as well. So that was kind of a lot, but just kind of hand the mic over to you, and we'll interject as you feel you would like us to, or yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for inviting me in this space. I appreciate speaking with you today. And well, maybe I could introduce a little bit more about myself. Thanks for the bio. I actually tend to forget what I write in there. So it's actually like, oh, cool. Forgot I did all that stuff. But so yeah, I am undocumented. I've been in this country since I was 2. I've been here almost all my life, and I've been living in Texas for like over 20 some years now. So I feel like I'm from Texas, to be honest. But I spent most of my childhood in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and most people.
That's where he was practicing before we came here.
Yeah. Most people only know Scranton from like The Office, right?
Yeah.
And it is just as boring as the show. So
it is.
no offense to Scranton.
None taken on my part.
Nope.
That's how like comparing it to living in Houston, it's like a whole other thing.
Absolutely.
And I still have a lot of family in Pennsylvania, but I grew up there most of my childhood, and when we came to Texas, it was actually like quite a shock, because we actually moved into a neighborhood that was like majority were like Spanish speaking people, and a lot of people from my family's hometown where they grew up in. So it was really weird, because in Scranton, I lived in a like majority white neighborhood, and we were like right on the outskirts of this Jewish community. So they were very Orthodox, so they never spoke to us. There was like a clear divide within a lot of the Orthodox Jews that lived there. So we didn't have a lot of people to have kids to hang out with. It was mainly just me, my siblings, and some of my cousins. But I can share that when we were in Pennsylvania, raids happened frequently as a kid. I must have been maybe about 6 different raids where they were looking through people's apartments, and they actually came to our apartments, and we've had to hide. And I remember when my younger brother and I, like, we were fighting, because that's what you do with your siblings, you just fight. And then he picked me up and he like smashed me against the wall because we were wrestling. But we looked right outside the window, and we kind of both just stopped, and we saw this big white bus like parked in front of our apartment building. And then we heard like footsteps running up the stairs, and it was my father, and my mom was behind him. She had my younger sister in his arms, and they took us into this other room. My father was a custodian for over like 18 years, I believe. So he had another room on the second floor that had like all the cleaning equipment. It was basically the attic. And then he started to move boxes and buckets from this corner of the room. And he grabbed, I don't remember if it was a knife or a screwdriver, but he started jamming it in the door, and it just opened that little door. It was covered in so many layers of paint because no one's really opened it. We didn't know what was inside. And as he opened the door, he started to shove us in there, like one by one. And I remember like still seeing the light, the dust particles, right before he closed the door, and it was like pitch black. Like I couldn't see my face in front of my hand. I couldn't see my mother or my siblings. And that was probably one of the few times when mom told us to be quiet and we were dead silent. And I could hear her like whisper, and she was praying and she was crying. And in the other side of the wall, I heard like all these voices, which I later found out was immigration. This was before immigration was, well, this department was ICE, actually.
Right.
And I was maybe about 6 years old when that happened. My brother was 8, and my younger sister, she was about 5. And it's like one of those experiences that just, it doesn't let you forget. Like it's something you carry even when you don't think you're not. I know that at that moment, what the lesson I learned was that it doesn't matter if I do good or bad. It's just by participating, somebody in your family can disappear. And I think that's what a lot of community members, there's a lot of people are going through, a lot of folks in the immigrant community. I think it's an unfortunate fact that that's an experience that a lot of kids are still going through right now. And that's actually why I got into organizing, because I thought about that other like 6-year-old kid who has to hide today, and without understanding the reasons for that. And I kind of just I've been trying most of my life to how to take that position of feeling powerless and hopelessness and flip it to where you can actually say you've gone through this experience and you've been able to be stronger because of it. It's not always true though. Like it's not an easy thing to go through, like those types of traumas in life. And that as you develop it, it seems like the strangest feeling I got was as I got older and I realized, oh, not everybody goes through this. Like, and that was like almost news to me. It just kind of felt like we're all struggling through this same experience. And then when I met a lot of people who weren't even aware that folks in our community had gone through this, it was rather challenging, because sometimes they were the same people that they would spew these rhetoric and these ideas about me leaving the country or me stealing jobs, etc. It's been like one of those weird feelings. I used to joke around with my father and some of my cousins about it, because I've been organizing for maybe over 10 years, but before that I was a landscaper and my family had landscaping businesses. And I remember when Trump was running for office, I was no longer mowing lawns, but I would help my brother or my dad every now and then. And just about all their clients had this Trump sign, and one of these clients actually had a build a wall sign on their fence. And yet these are the same people that use that anti-immigrant rhetoric, but they would leave money under the mat and open their back door to us. And it's as a kid, when you notice things like that, really like the message that I felt, and this isn't true for every single one of the clients, that'll be a lot of people were fantastic, super nice, and actually agreed with us, and we're trying to help be more conscious people. But the vast majority of the clients would always be happy when they would see us do the work, because it was almost like we knew our place. Like I was there to mow the lawn, and they would ask if I was married because they want to know if my wife would clean their house. And it was like this expectation. Like I actually had a client once who asked for someone to clean their house, and I gave her one of my cousin's phone number. She called, and like a week later when I went back there, she said, oh no, she was charging too much. And then she pulls me in and she says, do you know anyone who's here illegally that maybe can come back? And it's just like, one of those things where I heard her say that, and I'm like, what am I supposed to respond to this lady? Like she's literally asking, is there someone I can exploit? That
Yeah, exactly.
And it was so candidly actually that she would say something like that. And I mean, that's the frequency of those unusual conversations. I mean, when I was about 13, another client pulled me in. This was during when Bush was president at the moment. And she told me, like, you should ask your dad, because I heard there's a lot of illegals who are working these jobs and you all want to be careful. and both me and my father are undocumented. I mean, he doesn't even speak English, and I had to translate that to my dad because I didn't know what else to tell him. And he's like, "Oh yeah, just tell her thank you." We laughed. We're like, I don't know what to say to this lady. Like,
Wow. Wow. You know, it's well, I'm going to just pause on that for a moment. As a teacher, when Trump was elected, we had a lot of families. The kids weren't coming to school all of a sudden, and the families weren't coming for conferences or answering calls, and they were really scared. And as a school district, we ended up writing a memorandum that we were going to create a safe place for our families who were undocumented, whatever the experience they were having. And it was really hard because it took a while to gain the trust of these families to come to school and to come to meetings and to know and to trust that we weren't turning them in, you know, because there were so many raids going on in California and other places. And I have a pit in the bottom of my stomach thinking of you as a 6-year-old in a dark closet having to be quiet. And I, you know, as a Jewish woman, not Orthodox, but you know, I have family that were killed in the concentration camps and they had to hide for months and so long. And that fear of just wondering, when is it going to happen? When are you going to be taken? Um, yeah, it's nauseating. So I guess I just want to say to you, like, that's just hearing you, just giving you some love. Like, that's an awful thing for a 6-year-old or anyone to have to experience. Thank you for sharing that with us.
yeah, and well, I grew like almost like a dark sense of humor within, like, surviving through things like this is not easy, but it's such an ugly thing to go through and to remind yourself of that. Like, if I didn't figure out ways to laugh at it or joke about it, like I would probably be angrily crying all the time and just not being able to handle my emotions. So I've learned a lot from trying to take care of myself. But I do feel that a lot of my lived experience, like mostly everybody, it's like we're reflecting of your childhood and then how you grow through that phase and the world around you. Because it used to mean something different whenever I would think about being with my family, you know, or fulfilling a desire or a dream. But when you grow up like the way I grew up with, those things tend to mean less, and how you can participate seems to be meaningless, and then what you can offer. And then I think this is also why a lot of documented immigrants, like, we have a lot of mental health issues, and not necessarily a way of how to travel or navigate that space, because it's hard to try to understand, like, how do you cope with any of this when it's not within your language.
Right.
But I mean, the good thing I feel um, through the work that I've been able to do is like really connecting with youth who are like rebellious and angry and who are going through that transition period about how they're going to fight for the communities or themselves. And I've been seeing that a lot from our youth, which makes me really happy, you know. And I've been really fortunate to meet a lot of undocumented youth that were probably in a horrible place like I was. And all it took was like a little nudge in the right direction, and they kind of just jumped to it. And through the DACA work that we were able to give, which Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, it's a work permit that allows certain undocumented immigrants to be able to work in the U.S. and live here. It's not a fixed program. It's like a Band-Aid solution. What it does, it allows people to work here for 2 years, but you have to pay over $500. Well, $500 every 2 years, and at the same time, there's it's not guaranteed that you'll be able to renew it. And then every 2 years, they actually keep removing months. So I actually usually get it for like a year and a half, even though it's supposed to be for every 2 years because of the way the program works. It's just a bit of a mess.
Yeah, it is.
And it's not a pathway yet. It's not a pathway to citizenship. I mean,
Oh no, yeah, no, there isn't.
And as people might not know, I mean, you know, Obama put it in place in what, 2016 or so. And then Trump, through orders, was
Tried to
saying,
retract it.
tried to get rid of DACA. and now it's in a current state, which
It's
yeah,
not
allows,
compliant.
like Oscar was saying, it's a perpetual thing where you have to renew, and you're still not considered a citizen, even though many children like Oscar came into the United States at a young age, have lived here all or most of their lives. And that, it's interesting, Oscar, when you're talking about, because that line that you said, you just never know when someone in your family can disappear. And you learn that at a very young age on that piece. And you're, in some ways, you still have to carry that, right? Because our country, even though you contributed so much and are continuing to do it, isn't giving you citizenship and isn't giving you a pathway to it.
Well, honestly, like I see the systematic structure of exploitations of the descendants of indigenous people. Like the solution that this country offers is not really a solution to what the people are going through. It's more like about like a corporate economical interest of how to keep this machine growing. And the reason I say that is there are so many towns in Mexico and places that I was fortunate enough to be able to visit, where you would have a town that for many decades they would have like young people who had like no means to grow in the community they were in. And then for a reason, you fall in love with your kid, and all of a sudden you have a child, and now you have to leave your homeland because there isn't a way to sustain a family. And a lot of those people come here into the US. And like I've heard costs like over $20,000 that people have indebted themselves to try to come to this country to work.
Wow.
And for most of those people, they're never really going to pay that off. Like the amount of time it takes to work and not only save money for you to live here, but to save to make sure your family's okay from the country you're coming from. And all because like my father, when my father came to the US, the price of corn dropped. And it had a lot to do with US investment in ethanol. It was just a mess of things. So then you have many people like my father and my mother and myself who end up coming into this country to, like, it's weird how when people say like to live a better life, like it's such a miscommunication of what's happening, because it's not like we had such a great life and we just came here because it was better. Like there was a necessity that my family why they had to leave, and out of that necessity is where we end up living in a constant culture of exploitation. And so then you have people who live here for decades without really seeing their family, and because they can't really raise their family, then the next generation feels like their parents were never there for them. And they also fall in love young, and then the cycle just continues. Now they don't have anything over there and they need to come here. And it's a constant system that just pushes immigrants because of American foreign policy and then the corporate interventions that go into our homelands to exploit the resources that our homeland has to offer, forces immigrants to come here. And then those same corporate interests push the narrative that we're here to steal jobs. And the only reason that narrative exists is to make sure that poor people keep fighting poor people. And it completely void of what's actually happened, which is all these like major governmental corporate interests that end up making messed up deals with our government, and then end up, if they can't make deals with the government, they can go as far as killing their leaders and implementing people that will trade with this country at the expense of the people that live there.
Yeah.
So it's just a weird vicious circle that sometimes gets narrowed down, you know.
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. And I love that you just really talked about that and addressed it, because that constant culture of exploitation is so true. I mean, even going back to how Misha opened with indigenous land. I mean, the whites exploited indigenous land and that corporate exploitation, both in your home country and here, and how that is affecting indigenous people and immigrants is. Even that when you talked about the woman pulling aside, wanting a lower rate, right? That's exploitation. We're exploiting the labor as well.
Yeah.
It's just this vicious cycle. I'm really glad that you just talked about that, Oscar.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like, so like I think we've talked about it before about how there's like obvious racism, and then there's this like very subtle imprint of racism. Like I even see it in a lot of talking points for people that care about us. Like the idea that every Mexican is hardworking, not to say that Mexicans aren't, but or the idea that do you want to pick your own apples? Like, like if that's the best we could do, like it almost feels when someone says like, well, who's gonna work the field? This is why we need Mexicans here. It doesn't, like, to me, when I hear arguments like that, what it highlights for me is that they're saying, um, see, just the idea that nobody's open to work in the open fields makes no sense. Like people won't go out there to pick apples, spend all day outside and, feel like productive using your body. Like if they paid $15 or $20 an hour, like wouldn't people love that job? If they gave you health care and they gave you overtime, time leave, like people would love that job. Who wouldn't like to be outside in the open field picking vegetables and fruit? Like that seems like a dream compared to the tension and pressures that we live in the city. The reason they say like the Mexicans would do it, it's just because they know we don't have to offer exploited people any of those services. So even the idea, like, who else is going to pick your fruits? Like, pick your own damn fruits. Like, what is that? Like, it's a mixed message. It's almost like misses the point that it's not about having cheap labor in the U.S. It's about how we're treating people and humans, and if we're treating them the right way. And because of the culture of exploitation in the U.S., it almost feels like the cost goes into economics versus the human value. Like it's cheaper to pay Mexicans, which in that sense, what they mean is we can exploit this group of people. And no one seems to complain about it because they're doing the work. And it's a horrible process that gets repeated on over and over again. But there has been shifts and changes, and I'm happy to see a lot of, like, not only youth, but other people getting involved and being able to use the momentum that we've been gathering through a lot of the conversations around the treatment of Black lives and the recognition of Indigenous peoples, like all this constant back and forth. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think a lot of great things can develop out of it. And it just it matters to have the conversations, and then it matters to actually take a step towards how do you build a space where that thing that we've been talking about has an opportunity to actually develop. Right. And I think as more and more people take their steps, I feel like the things could be a lot better, and then we're headed in that direction, I hope.
So were you able to, so at what age did you leave Scranton?
I was about 10 when we got here to Houston.
So you were in elementary school in Scranton,
Yeah.
or were you not able to go to?
No, I went to elementary school in Scranton, and then like fifth grade here. Then I went to one middle school and like 3 different high schools.
And did you ever have any experiences with your teachers in Scranton, or were they all that were, racist or discriminatory towards you, or did you feel generally received and loved as hopefully teachers would?
Well, no, it's always been like it's subtle in the moment, especially if you're thrown back or you don't know how to respond, and later you realize how actually overt it was. Like, because I remember in Scranton, Pennsylvania, there was an elementary school called McNichols Plaza, and I remember it was like news when we had like the first 2 Black kids to come into the school. Like all the kids were talking about it, and in the neighborhood I lived, like there was like 4 different Black families there. So I didn't get what the buzz was, but as I got older, I realized, oh, it was news because they weren't there before. Like, but I was like in 2nd grade when I heard a lot of kids talking about it. And then some kid one day just walks up to me and a friend of mine who's Puerto Rican, and he starts telling me that we don't belong in this country. That this country was for the Blacks and the whites, and he used those words.
Wow.
And I was really like, why is he saying that? Because at the time, this is how poor the education system was when I was growing up. They were arguing that Puerto Rico was going to become the 51st state in my class. I don't know why they were arguing that necessarily now, but I remember that's what my retort was. Like, I thought I was being clever. I'm like, well, Puerto Rico is going to become the 51st state. And then I remember telling my teacher like that the kid told me and my friend that, because I was like really mad, but I didn't understand why. And then the teacher looks at me and she says, "Oh, it could be." Like that's all she said. I was like, "Oh, it could be," as in she doesn't really agree with me, and as in like I'm wrong, and that we're not actually supposed to be here, and like that other kid had a point. Like I read all that from her tone and the way she expressed herself.
Yeah.
Like it could be, so hold back. And the fact that it's like it doesn't, like at that point, like I've worked a lot in the dreamer movement, but I've never considered myself like a lot of the dreamers because I didn't go to college, so I don't have that 4.0 GPA. A lot of these system and structures didn't really, I didn't thrive there. So as I got older, I also realized that the whole narrative that a lot of people in our movement used to use about almost like we're the good ones, right? We're the ones that go to college. We're the ones that speak English. We're the ones that, it just like perpetuates a system that erases our history and our behavior. You know, most of the people I work with, I can see their indigenous background in their faces, you know, and in their mannerisms, the things that they say. But we confuse it with Mexican Spanish, not with our indigenous culture. And it's not our fault. It's just that if you grow up and every indigenous practice you had, they would stamp a cross or a Virgin Mary on it. You just think it's associated with that.
Right.
And it isn't until if you dig a little deeper that you realize how colonialism and Catholicism has tried to erase the history of indigenous people. And I mean, it makes sense if you think about it. Like, how else would you take all these people's land and the earth that we came from?
And the earth they cultivated.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, like how else would you convince enough people to do that if you convinced everyone that we're not even human to begin with? You know, through a lot of my work that we were doing around racial justice, one of the most pressing documents that I've gone to read was the Doctrines of Discovery, which was a document signed by the Catholic Church and the Pope that were concerned because the Portuguese and Spanish people were fighting over the land. And in order to stop them from fighting, they made this agreement that if they come to this side of the world and they're not to trade with indigenous people, they're there to conquer, to take, because the people here weren't Christians, and because they weren't Christians, they weren't human. So the church said that only people who are Christians are considered human. So that's why taking everything from them is no problem. And that's for the same reason why there's so many artifacts and cultural symbols that the church currently owns. And you can find a lot of like First Peoples culture locked in behind glass doors all over the world. And it's all dependent on this idea that we weren't humans. And now we're in a different place where some people actually take the step to recognize indigenous people as descendants of indigenous people, which I think is a good shift. And it makes me excited because as I was saying, the dreamer narrative didn't really fit into what I was saying because I always knew it was missing a thing. And the thing is, I don't want to assimilate. Like, I don't think I have to.
well,
Right.
no, and the education system was created by white men in our country, right? So it makes sense that you would feel like, I mean, there's so much lacking in our system. I mean, as a teacher of 30 years, I've always felt there's something wrong with the way we're doing things, you know? Even the stupid SAT exams and all those exams, I mean, they're all there because of capitalism. Not about showing what you know and who you are and how you're going to, you know, be in the world and make a difference in the world. And it's just so, you know, some people assimilate because they feel they have to, and some people don't because they know that they are more important. Like, it's not always important to assimilate. In fact, it's actually welcomes or magnifies colonial thinking and
Well, also,
yeah,
like
go ahead.
whatever they mean by assimilation isn't that, you know, like the idea that assimilation equals equal treatment for women or understanding of people's sexuality or treatment of children, like those are be a good person. That has nothing to do with assimilation. Like it almost the idea that we don't behave that way unless we behave the way Americans do, because America has all those values in it, which
Right.
you can clearly, like if you live here for any amount of time, you know that's not necessarily true. But like assimilation, what they mean isn't learn the language, is forget your language.
Right.
What they mean by assimilation isn't treat other people better. It's value the capitalist interest that we have at
The
expense of.
white man. I mean, assimilation is based on the white man, and you know, it dates back, right, when both Canada and the United States took Indigenous children from their families and put them in residential schooling, and the whole purpose was to beat the you know, Indigenous out of the people, to make them white, and that's the problem, and then that our culture, that white supremacy is about assimilation, right? And that piece, and trying to erase cultures, like what you were talking about before. And it's hugely problematic, instead of seeing people as they are and letting people have their culture and language.
Well, I mean, that's happened. What happened with those children, I think they got most press, was the 215 bodies that were found in Canada not too long ago. But that's happened throughout this entire continent. And the fact that it continues to happen today, like the way people talk about it, it's almost like, oh, can you believe this horrible thing happened a long time ago? And even if they apologize, their practices and involvement still perpetuate that behavior. You know, the idea that it stopped at some point isn't true. And this is just the reason I bring that up too, is because even though I am Mexican, like I'm not white Mexican, like in my family, there's definitely a mixture of a variety of different backgrounds. And I know that there is some level of French and Spanish somewhere there. The majority of my ancestry is Indigenous people. They just, through colonialism, that identity was removed. And then for the sake of their survival, they forcefully were removed from their own language. So the idea that the things that they do it's weird how Americans sometimes see Mexicans like we came from Spain, when like Mexico is the Mexica, which is the Mexica people. So then that's only one small part of what the country of Mexico is. Not everyone there was Mexica. And then to just the amount of time and space that it goes from Indigenous people to now we're immigrants is like ridiculously stupid. Because how are people who are of this land, like myself and my family, going to be called immigrants? Not because of the land, just because of the law.
Right.
So we're defined by the law, not by the land in which we live in, which again is a tool to use to categorize an entire group of people as less than. And it's just it's wildly uncomfortable living in this country, not only because I'm undocumented, but because of the way the culture is in this country, and the practices and the systems and the laws that it builds that has been trying to erase our people for. Well, I mean, like if you ever go to the Science Museum of Natural Science here, I remember I went there specifically because I wanted to see some culture, some historical artifact of Mayan and Aztec people. But when you go there, you'll see like in that fourth floor, I think there's a timeline of the people. And it was started like in some made up time that they have, and they end just about 400 to 500 years ago. It's almost like it's telling you the Mayas stopped here, you know, the Aztecs stopped here, you know, and there's no mention of the Toltec or the Zapotec, like all the different communities that are still alive today, including Mayan and Aztec people. Like they're still alive right now, and since back then till right now are continuously trying to fight just for survival and to be able to live in their land. Yeah. But because every little thing, like small things, it makes you feel like all these people lived here a long time ago and they're dead. And it's a constant repetition of the way this idea is sold to you, because then that way you wouldn't feel like you have to recognize the land or take another step about land back and take another step of what it actually means to feed into a system that continues to steal and break treaties of indigenous people, whether it be calling us immigrants, or whether it be calling us people who steal jobs, or just backwards people who don't want to accept the American way. And how could you, when everything in the American way has been leading to the extinction of you and extinction of you and your people.
Right. Right. Yeah, and even without I'm just thinking about when my grandfather came to this country. He was an undocumented, he was an illegal immigrant, but he was coming from Poland. He wasn't born on this, his ancestors were not born on this land. And part of him coming here, and all the people that were coming during that time frame, Italians, and other groups, they would immediately try to get into English so that they wouldn't have issues, right? It's like, forget your culture. There were kids that would not learn their family's language because it was like, nope, we just speak English here. And this country is really, the beauty of this country is all the languages that are spoken here. And yet, when you are the people of this land and you're having to completely erase, not because your family chose to, but because of the laws, because of the way you're treated, because of the way you're dehumanized, that if you were to hang on to who you are, there would be really serious ramifications. And I have hope that that's going to start to be less and less, but it's still so painful to watch it as someone who loves languages and loves, blending with cultures, and also not blending, but appreciating the culture of a person. It's hard. It's hard to watch. I can't even imagine how it would feel to live it.
Well, I also feel fortunate too that, like, I feel I'm at a turning point, and I'm seeing a lot of youth who are proudly want to reconnect with their indigenous ancestry, and cultivate and bring back the cultures and ideas, and I mean, like, with their head up high as, yes, this is who we are, and we're not going to let, like, your viewpoint of the universe dictate how I feel about myself, my people, and my ancestry. And I mean, it's a very sick thing to try to learn about your people and then come to the conclusion that the descendants of the people that murdered your people are now educating you about your people. So how much can you really trust that narrative? How much can you really think that that's based on reality and truth? And I mean, you can see it just anywhere you want to look into indigenous people. It's always that BBC British accent, as like that's driving the narrative force, or it's the thick Spanish accent that comes into when you look through it, because it's still giving you through the perspective and viewpoint of from one colonizer. And it's like the fight about, like, they don't let us speak Spanish in schools. I'm like, well, they don't let us speak Nahuatl in Spanish schools. So, like, I'm not gonna fight for the language of one oppressor over the other. Like, I want to, and I'm taking actually classes to learn my language and learn our people, because I do find it really valuable. I take some pre-Hispanic dance classes as well to try to go through the process. But I can tell you, like, it's a very weird feeling to know that it's in you, but you're be so confused that you almost feel like you're appropriating your own culture. Like, it's a very, very confusing place to be in, but I love the fact that I can connect with a lot of youth who are struggling with the same thing that I'm struggling with, and then find a way to continue and to move forward, because it does have a lot of value. It does have a lot of meaning. And I feel like one of those people, I just can't let it be forgotten, because, like, we're still alive, we're still here. And to me, that's a beautiful thing to be celebrated as often as we can. That despite, that's why, like, the Day of the Dead that just happened in the beginning of this month, it's the festival of the dead, and it came from a lot of indigenous practices. But that was the church who consistently try to get rid of this celebration of how your people die, because it's such a threat to the colonial ideal and to the values of Christianity, that if you don't believe in heaven and you think you can still celebrate and talk to people. So they try to switch the date, which is why they celebrate November 2nd, which is an All Saints Day. So they try to mix it up all together in order. So again, if they can't destroy your culture, they'll just put a cross on it. And now the big irony that I often see about it is, though I understand the concern of people saying about appropriating cultures that they don't understand, but now I feel weird how those descendants of the people that killed our people from dressing up like that, dress up like that as a fashion statement. And it almost feels like, oh, like in their eagerness to kill off my people, they forgot to teach their kids things. So now they're dying for culture, which is why they're trying to connect to the culture that's already there. And it's a rather tragic comedy, the idea that tends to happen, and that there's a lot of white people who love the culture because they don't know how to celebrate their own culture. Or there's a lot of people who do actually exploit the culture. They take it as a tourist idea. I'll dress up like them today, and then I'll continue imagining that they're not human tomorrow. So like there's a mixture of all of that happening. But for me on my end, I see that the tradition is so powerful, it just can't be stopped. And to me, that has huge value, even if it's being exploited and manipulated. Because you can go to Target and buy a whole Day of the Dead kit now from people who don't understand the culture, the history, or what it's there for. They just found a way to make money out of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's capitalism. The definition is exploitation. Yeah, absolutely. You were listening to a podcast this morning about tribal. What was the?
Yeah, I was listening to, actually it was yesterday.
Yesterday.
It was Code Switch, and they had on, it had aired before, but looking at blood quantum with tribes and indigenous people, and really people having different feelings about it, because in order to be considered indigenous, you have to have a certain amount of what the blood quantum in you for your tribe. And most tribes, it's like about 1/4. So it has meant that in some families, children then aren't able to get, I'm using the wrong wording, but qualified to be a tribal member, because they don't have that amount of blood. It's not really science blood, though. It's another construct by our federal government.
Yeah.
My understanding, like they figured out what, the ancestral line and put a number on things. But it's, people have, the indigenous individuals that they were interviewing had different opinions on it. Some were like, yes, we need this so that our tribes stay authentic. And then other people are like, my children aren't able to qualify to be members of the tribe and get benefits from that and be part of the culture because of, through marriage, we were both a fourth and now our kids are only like an eighth. So it was really interesting discussion on that piece. I don't know, Oscar, if you've heard about it. Obviously I was hearing a podcast, and I don't know if you have thoughts on it.
Well, I think things like that are developed to keep people fighting amongst each other. Like it's like the 1 drop rule, right? Like if white people had a 1 drop of black blood inside them, then they were considered black in order to continue the ideals of white supremacy. So the idea that you will be labeled indigenous based on the percentage of DNA that this lab constructs and lets you know you're no longer your culture based on your culture. You're your culture based on what someone else defines a quantitative method to interpret this as, which is like, again, it's a made up stupid thing that it really doesn't have any value into it. I can understand some people's practices or ideas and having strong feelings around it, but if the idea that there is some kind of pure blood that makes you indigenous, how is that narrative or that practice or that philosophical viewpoint any different than white supremacy? Like, what's the point of saying that if you don't have this amount of blood or pure or skin, that a color that you're not as valuable as a person as we are? Now, if it's the whole thing about how you embed people in practices and cultures, sometimes that just goes through the years of having the lived experience and practicing those cultures and then being recognized by the people themselves. like the government has no right to tell indigenous people who is and who is not indigenous, for primarily the reason that the government, since it's been formed, have been trying to get rid of indigenous people, and now they're just finding ways to make sure that other people just keep fighting within each other. I just don't find any I understand the strong opinions on it. Personally, I don't find any value in arguing around whether it should or shouldn't. I think if however they feel, I think what matters the most is if they can recognize each other as a community, and if we can recognize each other as a community and being able to work from that perspective, and then let someone else navigate what we should be fighting about.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's a constant thing that I've heard around like Latino and Latinx. Like there's a big debate around that, and I don't like getting involved into the discussion because I don't think it has any like value that would help us. Like I completely understand when I hear from folks who are LGBTQ plus and why they feel that the X is to not gender certain words that have a label. But I also have heard from LGBTQ that was put together by white liberals, not by the people themselves. And then the idea that Latino represents indigenous people is also a backwards idea because we don't speak Latin. And I don't know where this term came up and why it's a brushstroke. Everyone here is Latino when we're talking about hundreds of different nations, thousands of different tribes, hundreds of different languages. And all of a sudden we're all Latino. Like it's an erasure of indigenous history, and it paints everything on a monolith. And so I've seen a lot of white folks on TV bring up that argument to like Latino. So what do you think about this Latino and Latinx? Like they're starting a fight, like for their entertainment, we should argue of why we agree or disagree with trans people, which I just like, it has no value. And I'm not what the teacher that I have, he actually talks about how in the language, you don't gender people. So the whole idea of male and female isn't even like an argument in their language because it doesn't even go to that mind of thinking. So to them, it rather seems weird that because in Spanish everything is gendered, that would be an issue because it doesn't feel like it's something that should even come up.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and I mean the languages, French, Spanish, there are lots of languages, Italian, where you have this gender for everything, right? And it's
The table is feminine, the
yeah,
floor is masculine, and
I know,
just
a beard is feminine.
yeah, exactly. Mustache is masculine. I don't really.
Yeah, yeah, there are a lot of very strange, yeah, who the hell knows why they did what they did. But I think it like you said, I in fact listened to a podcast not long ago about the whole argument of Latino, Latinx, and it was really interesting to me because that is the idea, was that it was pitting people against each other, and that's where you had, the Jim Crow, pitting the poor white people against the black people and the black people against the, it was just, it seems to be
it's a way to keep exploitation
Yeah.
happening, right? Yeah. People fighting against each other instead of communities coming together and recognizing our differences and accepting them, and connecting in that capacity.
Yeah, but I mean, I do think our communities do come together. I feel like I've just been a bummer. Like I do think that our like communities do come together, and there's a lot of things that are doing to move in that direction. And I do feel that we are moving in that direction. It's just that it can be rather uncomfortable for a lot of people, and which I totally makes sense. And like COVID, we've been collectively as I hope so, as a human society, been struggling through this together. And I was really like depressed in the beginning of the year because I kept hearing people saying, I just want things to go back how they were. And I'm like, the hell I do. Like how
yeah, right.
it was horrible. Like I didn't feel safe. I wasn't comfortable. Like there's a lot of things that we ignored. And I think it was like towards the middle of the year when I was reading articles about people quitting the jobs that they hated and going through the process of trying to figure out, no, what's right for me as a person. That was very uplifting for me because those are like really difficult, challenging mindsets to be in. But I think they're necessary for like the growth of a human experience. So as I saw more people develop, I'm like, okay, good, because I know that like in my misery sometimes it's just because like it's difficult to live this life. But if you can push through it, like there's beautiful things that develop out of it. There are things that come in your culture, and then how you become after going through all this trauma. Like there is an opportunity there to relieve just by sharing who you are, the pain that other people who are going through that they can relate to yours. And I think all of that is a wonderful experience. And I'm hoping that, and I feel more hopeful recently that a lot of people are willing to go through that right now. You know, I don't know why anyone would want to go back to how things were before COVID. I mean, Trump was still president then, especially, but it's just like one of those things where it's like, I don't get the necessity, but because the fact is the poverty gap was growing. There's so many people here who can't forget a living wage, or just don't find any value in what they do every day. And now it's I think, a collective opportunity to take this horrible thing and to use it as something to wake us up and then move us into that uncomfortable phase of growth and treat each other better. And that's really what I hope.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's a really important message, that one thing that we've definitely been learning over the last 2 years is how to sit in the uncomfortable, and just really, because through the uncomfortable, there's healing. I mean, even for example, when we get into a fight and we don't yell and scream at each other, but there's some tension, right? And when we're willing to sit down and talk about it, and it's really uncomfortable to say our truth with each other, knowing that it's going to affect the other person, we feel so much more bonded afterwards. Like there's so much healing that goes on, being willing to move through the discomfort instead of trying to avoid it or negate it or dismiss it. And I think that as a culture, if you can call it a culture here in the United States, there is a desire. I mean, that's why you have so much addiction, right? People want to get rid of, go numb, don't want to deal with the discomfort, don't want to speak the truth. That's why we have the elephants in the room, right? It's just a society of avoidance of the uncomfortable. And so, but yeah, I've just learned more and more as I age, and I am aging. Thank goodness. The alternative would be really bad. But, to be willing to sit in that uncomfortable, because it's temporary. Everything's temporary. But when we choose, and those of you who are listening, when we choose to stand up for what we believe in and really do what we can to support our life and our joy and other people's lives who are more marginalized, disenfranchised, or whatever it is, we're making a statement for a better world, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And that discomfort is temporary. Just like folks who deal with mental illness like myself, I get into depressive states. That's temporary. Joy can be temporary too. And it takes a lot of effort to kind of find that emphasis. Where am I going to put my energy? But it was really nice to hear you say that you're hopeful, because that's been the majority of our guests. They get to a place to be able to say, this really sucks. It has sucked. And this thing is what brings me hope. Not that the system requires you to say that you're hopeful. That's not our purpose of our webinar.
I do think that like there's a lot of wonderful things that have come from this country in practices and culture and behavior too. So it's not like the country is just one horrible capitalistic pool of corporate entities. Like it's, for as long as there's been the white supremacist push, there's been people fighting against it. And that's what makes a difference in living in this country. I don't know that if I would have just stayed and grow up in Mexico, that I would be doing different work necessarily, because the systems in Mexico are horrible too, and being able to fight through it. So it's not like a blind recognition just that this country is this one thing. Right. It's a mixture of so many different practices. And as long as there's white supremacists fighting for their ideals and practices, there's going to be people like y'all and me and a lot of people in our community who are going to call it out for what it is, and then take steps to move it. And like, I know we're almost out of time too, and last thing I'd say is just that there's a lot of people who keep telling our youth that they're obsessed with race, but it's not the youth that's obsessed with race. Is that we just recognize how laws were implemented and focused on race. So we're just recognizing the things that people have done here. And it's not that we, or not that I'm the young one, there's a lot of people younger than me. They're not obsessed with race. It's just that, like, how's the next generation obsessed with race when they literally have laws of who can use what toilet based on race? Like, like it's, and because we recognize all these things does not mean that we're the ones that are at fault. It just means that you're making people uncomfortable with calling out what is obvious.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that's another way to try to dismiss it, right? You're obsessed with it. Well, no, we're speaking authentically about what has happened. We're not allowing you to erase what has happened historically. And I think it's just another example of white supremacists trying to knock it down again. And I love the fact, Oscar, that you talk about hope and about youth activism, because I do think our youths are really the ones making a huge difference right now and are going to continue to make a difference.
Yeah. Thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Yeah.
Really appreciate it. We'll
Yes.
say goodbye to our guests and to those people watching on Facebook, and the train is going by. It always gets so loud. But anyways, really glad that you were here with us, and wishing you the absolute best. And if there's anything we can do in the future to support you in your community of, at Houston, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you for being here with us.
Just really appreciate you being here, Oscar, and just wonderful words of wisdom that I hope everyone took in and really think about going forward. Thank you.